Do you know what the sentient pawns come grown in a petri dish cultured by Reagan excrement and given a black robe and the painfully ironic title of honorable by a man who would spend his presidential retirement finger painting is? Well, it's the subject of this week's political figure episode, Samuel Alito. Benito Alito was born April 1st, 1950 in Trenton, New Jersey, making him arguably the worst April Fool's joke ever played on humanity. Being the son of an Italian-American mom, an Italian immigrant father, and born just 5 years after the death of Mussolini, it makes you wonder if his faded fetish of fascism was genetic. He graduated from Steinert High School in 1968 before going on to Princeton. While at Princeton, and before his brain had completely succumbed to lead poisoning, he actually advocated against sodomy laws and LGBTQ discrimination. But don't worry, any sense of integrity or social justice would soon be extinguished. While at Yale, he was drafted, sort of, into ROTC. I don't know, he had a really low selective service number, and then he ended up in the reserves where he served until 1980. He did this simultaneously while graduating from Princeton and then going to Yale, where he graduated with his Juris Doctor in 1975. I gotta know what the hell is going on at Yale, because they have given some really questionable people degrees. Clarence Thomas, Josh Hawley, Ron DeSantis. I don't know how their pedigree is not tarnishing the prestige, but if I was a Yale grad, I would be incredibly embarrassed by this point. After Yale, he clerked for a Third Circuit Court Appeals judge. After that, he moved up to be an assistant United States attorney, serving under Marianne Trump Barry, who is Donald Trump's oldest sister. That's right, Donald Trump's oldest sister was a U.S. attorney and then federal judge. And even she thinks Donald Trump is a moronic, self-absorbed liar McLie face. That's a direct quote. Probably. Then in 1980, when some cosmic bump bounced us onto the bad timeline and got Ronald Reagan elected, Sedition Sam started aggressively seeking a job in the Reagan administration. Of course, Reagan readily recognized that Alito was a man, if given the right opportunity, could carry on his legacy of helping to destroy this country he hated so much long after he was gone. So he made him assistant to the Solicitor General. But at least having solicitation in his title was appropriate, since he would go on to be such a corporate whore. It was in this position he was able to start arguing cases in front of the Supreme Court and began a lifelong career of legally attacking women and the Constitution. Sadly, he was quite good at his job. It was at this point that he first successfully argued to uphold an abortion ban that had no exemption for the health of the mother. Because, you know, he hates women. Reagan liked his work so much that he got a promotion to Deputy Assistant Attorney General. It was at this job that he spent most of his time arguing that the Attorney General should have more law enforcement capabilities and authority because, you know, you can't do a fascism without a police state. Now starting to feel completely comfortable in his conservatism, he started to say shit like Barry Goldwater's campaign was a major influence on him. Barry fucking Goldwater's 1964 presidential campaign. In 87, he became a United States attorney. It was around this time, like a true asshole, he joined the Federalist Society. Then in 1990, Daddy Bush nominated him for the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. Here he dissented when the Third Court ruled that a woman was not legally compelled to tell her husband before receiving an abortion. He argued that bitches are property and need permission, so they should have upheld spousal notification. That's a direct quote. Probably. He ruled that the state of Pennsylvania was immune from wrongful termination lawsuits. He dissented that it should be a-okay for a court to exclude evidence about somebody's past behavior in a discrimination case, specifically racist behavior in the workplace. He dissented that qualified immunity should protect law enforcement officers from civil rights violations after strip searching a mother and her 10-year-old daughter. Alito remained a federal judge until 2005, when the guy we once thought would be the dumbest person to ever sit in the Oval Office decided he would make a good Supreme Court judge. Many people disagreed, including the ACLU, who formally opposed his nomination, something they've only done 3 other times in their entire history, most recently with Brett Kavanaugh. And while Alito did manage to make it through his Senate hearings without crying about how much he loved beer, they weren't without controversy. A good portion of that controversy centered around his past association with the conservative extremist group Concerned Alumni of Princeton. First, I want to say that if you belong to a group that's the Concerned blank of blank, just pull the bus stop cord and get off the fucking planet. That is the most Karen shit you can fucking do. His response to questions about his association with this group is, I deplore them, I disavow them as racist, sexist, and unethical, and they stand against everything that I stand for. He said the only reason I joined them and then bragged about them in my job application for the Reagan administration was because I needed to show off my conservative credentials. That was his fucking response. Like, yeah, hey, I joined the brown shirts and I wore the uniform, but I disagreed with everything about them. I just really wanted a job with the Third Reich's inner circle and I needed something to put on a resume. We've all been there, right? Conservatives heard that and they were like, yeah, this guy's totally got the moral and ethical fortitude to be a Supreme Court judge. Anyway, he was approved mostly along party lines and would go on to be a justice that would make Scalia look like a man of integrity. He views the Constitution like it's a yoga instructor. It's flexible. When there's no legitimate conservative interpretation to be had, he'll, make one up. He's argued that the Civil Rights Act doesn't protect against discrimination based on orientation or identity. He also ruled in Chevron that government agencies really shouldn't have the ability to tell businesses that they can't poison you in whatever way they see fit. He was the driving force behind restricting women's rights and overturning Roe, which has been his lifelong career goal. And he's most recently ruled that apparently he thinks Donald Trump should be king. But if you think his rulings are bad, you should hear how he is as a person. Like Clarence Thomas, he has absolutely no ethical concerns with accepting bribe gifts. Makes no difference to him if it's from businesses, lobbyists, or people or businesses that will be affected or have been affected by his rulings. He also has argued that he's not actually required to report the gifts that he is required to report. And when journalists published that he had been unethically receiving such gifts, and Congress started pondering whether or not they should maybe put some ethical standards on the Supreme Court, came out with a straight face and said, nope, Congress, we're not going to let you do that because absolutely no one, including Congress, has any authority to hold the Supreme Court accountable or subject us to any ethical standards whatsoever. We will put our own ethical standards in place and abide by them as we see fit, which is fucking ridiculous because Congress has literally always set the rules for the Supreme Court. And then, there's the Supreme Court briefs he's leaked to conservative groups he favors before the rulings had actually been handed down as well. All of these ethical transgressions have obviously brought some criticism from the media and, anybody who doesn't hate democracy, which included Prince Harry and Boris fucking Johnson. Can you imagine being such a douchebag? Boris Johnson called you out. As a result, Alito publicly mocked them, as anyone would expect a justice in the highest court of the land would do. In a speech to none other than the Heritage Foundation, he responded to critics in the media by saying they crossed a line by questioning the court's integrity. And honestly, I gotta say, this is one of the rare times I agree with Sam Alito because he has made sure that the Supreme Court has absolutely no integrity left to question. And in a seemingly growing trend for Supreme Court justices, he's married to a treasonous, democracy-hating white supremacist, Christian nationalist, who you may recall had a recent little flag debacle where she flew some flags to show her support for Donald Trump and January 6ers, and was caught saying that she wanted another flag to show her hatred for the rainbow community in the lead up to Pride Month. Alito was, of course, completely unaware and took no responsibility for the flags being flown at the house where he lives. Alito then played the victim card, saying his wife only did it because she was upset that somebody blamed him for the January 6 attacks, and she had to look at a neighbor who had a "fuck Trump" sign in her yard. Which I can't imagine how traumatizing it would be to have to stare at a yard sign that says "fuck the presidential candidate I voted for." My God, could you just imagine if Trump supporters went around with signs and hats and flags and bumper stickers and yard signs and t-shirts and profile pictures and decals that said something like "fuck Joe Biden"? It's not like they've ever chanted that at sporting events or had merchandise tents at flea markets in every single non-political event we've been to for the last 8 years. I totally understand how hard that was on her. Except apparently none of that happened until 3 weeks after the flag incident. Anyway, remember guys, whoever wins in November may very likely be picking this asshat's replacement. The person who gets a lifetime appointment to the bench of the Supreme Court matters way more than whoever is sitting in the Oval Office for the next 4 years. Vote for Weekend at Bernie's and make it very clear that another Alito is a big no.